Gaming Bracket!
What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is of course part of a series where I focus on a specific director and rank that director's work from worst to best. Done such directors in the past such as David Lynch, David Fincher, Spike Lee. The list goes on. You guys can check that on my director playlist down below. But guys, you clicked on this video, so you know it. This time around, I'm focusing on Todd Phillips movies and ranking them from worst to best. Now, as of the filming of this video, which is of course late February 2022, Todd Phillips has done 10 films. So I'll be ranking those 10 films from 10 being his worst to 1 being his best, and of course, my opinion. And as always, this will not include any TV shows of his that he might have done, music videos, TV movies, none of that. Just specifically movies. So again, all that exposition to the side, guys. Let's get started with my number 10. So my number 10 is Starsky and Hutch. This is a movie that's based on a TV show. I did not watch the TV show, and just right off the bat, I did not like this movie in the slightest. Chemistry aside, there really isn't much to this movie. Filmmaking is pretty bland by the numbers. Humor just didn't work for me, and that's honestly why it's my number 10. Next up, my number 9 is Due Date. So similar to Starsky and Hutch, the chemistry is really good between the two leads, Zach Galifianakis and then, of course, you have Robert Downey Jr. They're great together, but the movie as a whole just doesn't really mesh, doesn't really come together as a whole for me personally. I did feel myself very disappointed by this movie because given the talent behind the cameras and in front, you would think it would have been good, but alas, here we are. So yeah, that was my number 9. Next up, my number 8 is The Hangover Part 3, aka the movie that a lot of people seem to defend. I personally did not like this movie in the slightest. A lot of people will say, oh, well, it's trying to be different from the other two. Shouldn't you praise that? And it's like, okay, it tries to be a thriller. Cool. But as a thriller, it doesn't really work. And then if you argue that, oh, well, it's actually a dark comedy, the comedy doesn't work either. So the elements that it's trying to be, the genres, I should say, it just doesn't really work for me personally. And it just really kind of feels as though the Wolfpack is just, they don't have their heart into it, at least for me personally viewing it. I get why some people might like it, but for me personally, I just wasn't a fan of this movie, and that's why it's my number 8. Next up, my number 7 is Road Trip. So Road Trip is a movie that has its elements. I especially like the scene where the car, the boys try to have the car go over the lake, if you will, or the river, whatever it was. I'm sorry, the body of water, I forget off the top of my head. But that scene I thought was pretty funny. And it does have its elements for sure. But I can't lie, although there are some funny moments sprinkled throughout, the destination and even honestly the setup is pretty predictable. So this movie will really kind of depend on your range in terms of predictability with comedies. If you are fine with predictable comedies, then I think you'll get a lot out of this. But for me personally, I just really couldn't say that, oh, I got a lot out of it. It had its moments for sure, but that's about it. It's not a movie that I'll probably think about in a couple of days. And I did watch this, I believe it was last week as of the filming of this video. But yeah, that's my number 7. Next up, my number 6 is The Hangover Part 2, aka the carbon copy of the original. Seriously, it's a carbon copy of the original. It's darker for sure, and I think that kind of helps out a little bit. But overall, I mean, if you've seen the first one, there's no reason for this to exist other than it make a lot of money. And it did. But yeah, that's my number 6. Next up, my number 5 is Old School. Will Ferrell. Depending on your proclivity on his tendencies of being a comedian, you might really like this or you might not. I felt kind of mixed about this. I thought, again, similar to Road Trip, it had its elements. But the reason why I liked this a bit better than Road Trip is that I felt like the filmmaking was a bit better than that movie. And I do think that there was more attempt to actually try and everything, more consistency. Is it great? No, in my opinion, it's not. But again, it did have its elements, and I would be lying if I said that I didn't have a couple chuckles here and there. But yeah, that is my number 5. Next up, my number 4, this is going to be the controversial pick. My number 4 is School for Scoundrels with Billy Bob Thornton. This movie, I don't think is perfect. I think it's actually very flawed, but I can't lie, Billy Bob Thornton, his shtick, his bad Santa, but PG-13 kind of shtick, it actually really worked for me this time around in this movie. I know a lot of people that hate this movie, but I actually enjoyed it. I don't think it's perfect. Again, I really want to emphasize that because it's very predictable in a lot of ways, but I do think that first act is quite strong, and I did find myself chuckling throughout, which is something I can't really say about all these other comedies that Todd Phillips has done. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, definitely check it out, but I'm going to say, maybe check it out because it might perk your interest. It's like Dead Poet Society meets Fight Club, meets Full Metal Jacket meets Dodgeball. It's a weird combination, but for me, it kind of works to an extent. But yeah, that's my number 4. Next up, my number 3 is War Dogs. Jonah Hill, Miles Teller, great chemistry, mixing thriller elements with, of course, comedy elements. It actually works and blends pretty well. Not a perfect movie, but I did enjoy this movie quite a bit when it came out. And yeah, that's why it's on number 3. Next up, my number 2 is The Hangover. So this movie, I don't jerk off as many people do, but I still do quite enjoy The Hangover. It's a movie that is consistently filled with debauchery, and although I'm not laughing throughout this movie, I do chuckle throughout this movie, and I do appreciate the humor and everything that this movie's going for. I personally would say I've only seen this movie twice, but I would say that this is definitely probably the best comedy that Todd Phillips has done, in my opinion, personally. And that's why I personally own it. All right, guys, my number one, the one that you probably already guessed, but my number one is Joker. So this movie sticks out like a sore thumb with his filmography. All these other movies were comedies, except Joker. And I have to say, Joker surprisingly works well. I will say that each time I've seen it, it does dip a little bit in quality in terms of my rating, but I do think that this is overall a good movie. It's why I own it on 4K. I'm curious if they're going to be doing a Joker 2, but I also am curious if they're just going to do a retread of the first one, because that's what Phillips did with The Hangover Part 2. Hopefully not, but I do think Joker's good. It's very well acted. It's consistently dark. It does have a lot to say, even if some of it does kind of falter a bit. But overall, I do think that Todd Phillips making the transition into a superhero, thriller, I think that it kind of worked pretty well, especially more so than any of his other movies. So, job well done, Todd Phillips. But yeah, that's my number one. So guys, I like to talk about the director usually a little bit after, obviously ranking their work. So Todd Phillips, for me personally, I'm not a big fan of his work. As you guys can see, a lot of these movies I gave like a 2 or 1.5 out of 5-star rating. Some of them 2.5. I think he's a director that in terms of comedy, I'm not the biggest fan of. I think that he is inconsistent when it comes to the comedies. Might not just be for me personally, but also I feel like the filmmaking just isn't something that kind of stands out. It wasn't until honestly Joker that I said to myself, wow, yeah, okay, the filmmaking is really standing out. But I'm not saying necessarily filmmaking has to stand out, but I do think that you have to have a voice. And I feel like Todd Phillips didn't really have a voice up until Joker, other than, oh, I'm that guy that likes doing raunchy comedies, and I also like working with comedic actors, and, we all have a good time on set and everything. Besides that, I feel like that's all we really kind of knew from him. But again, I do respect and appreciate a lot of people that like Todd Phillips. For me personally, not a big fan of his, but I will say that I do respect him to an extent. And yeah, I'm glad that he at least gave us Joker and Hangover in terms of movies I can fully recommend. But yeah, guys, that's my ranking of Todd Phillips' work. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below on his ranking, as well as your ranking for his work down below. And as always, go with the subscription, notification bell, and I'll catch you guys later.